Okay, it's 2 minutes past the hour and it's maybe time to start. So warm welcome everybody to the second FEMS meetup event. So my name is Pekka Kahri. I work at Helsinki University Hospital and I'm the deputy coordinator of the FEMS project. Today's topic is on federated data networks. What are they and how do they promote clinical research? Our speakers are Stiven from Aridhia and Bruno Robalo from Erasmus. Before we let Bruno and Ross to take the stage, so I will very briefly introduce you to our meetup series. So just a reminder that this is the second meetup now. The first meetup, which was an introduction to our project on a topic towards pediatric health data space, is available on YouTube. And this second meetup will also be made available on YouTube later on. This autumn, we still have 2 more sessions to come, November 19 and December 17. So you can already mark your calendars with those. Also follow the LinkedIn account and our fems.eu website for any details. Just as a short recap on what FEMS project is all about. So there is an urgent need for timely and safe data sharing in pediatrics because pediatrics is characterized by a small number of complex pediatric and rare disease patients per country, which gives us really limited ability to conduct research based on data. These limited real-world data for new or expensive therapies slows down adoption and assessment of new treatment outcomes. We're also lacking ways to engage with medtech industry and innovation ecosystems. And even in clinical development, so many countries only have 1 or 2 children's hospitals, especially on the most demanding tertiary care. So we need collaboration cross borders in order to make benchmarking and improve our performance and efficiency of our pediatric care. So we are working towards pediatric health data space, and FEMS project is our vehicle to that. We are a 3-year project co-funded by European Union, Horizon Europe program, and UK Research and Innovation with 14 partners, which are from Finland, Latvia, the Netherlands, UK, Spain, and Italy. Today's speakers are our key members of our FEMS group. So Bruno Robalo is a postdoctoral researcher at the Erasmus Medical Center in Rotterdam, and he leads our work package 3 and will introduce himself when he starts. And then Stiven is a product manager at Aridhia, and in FEMS he is leading the delivery of the Federated Node, which is an open source component that allows users to perform data analysis on remotely held data. So I will give the floor now to Bruno and Ross, and as usually, so after the presentation there will be an interactive Q&A session, so you feel free then to pose any questions and engage in a discussion. But now the floor is to you, Bruno and Ross.
Yes.
Hi everyone.
I'll share my screen now.
Thanks, Bruno. Yeah, so I'll speak for a bit first. So I'll give everyone an introduction to what data federation is and what the problem really that we're trying to solve with it. Bruno will then do a bit more of a deep dive into what a federated network actually looks like. We'll both speak a bit about the common standards that we're adopting as part of the FEMS network to make federation possible, and then we'll finish by looking at the initial sort of specific use cases that we're hoping to deliver as part of FEMS. So if you could, next slide, please, Bruno. Thanks. So yeah, so I mean, this is kind of the foundational question and important to answer. So like, why are we pursuing data federation? Like, what's the purpose of taking this approach? So I think generally speaking, the main driver for this is the emergence of data protection legislation. And I think everyone is aware of that, even if it's just, you know, accepting cookie consent banners and things like that. And everybody, I think, also accepts the importance of ensuring that organizations, companies that hold personal data, like manage that responsibly and are held to account if they don't. So no one's disputing the importance of this legislation. However, one of the flip sides of that is that it does make data sharing either outside of organizations or across national boundaries. It does make that more difficult, and therefore it does make collaboration on research projects more difficult. Not impossible, but more difficult. And data federation is one possible kind of like technological answer to this problem. So if you could go to the next slide, please, Bruno, that would be really helpful. Thank you. So what do we mean by data federation? So we use a simple 3-level model to define data federation. And like I said, Bruno will go into more detail as to what a federated network looks like. But at a high level, level 0 is no federation. So that's really what people would expect, I guess, when you talk about data sharing, like typically. So this is, I'm a researcher, I'm an analyst, you're a data owner, I request access to your data, and when you give me that access, I receive a copy of that data. Now, obviously, we would expect that to be handled in a secure environment, and it may be subject to, a data usage agreement or conditions or whatever, but fundamentally, I have access to the full data set, I receive my own copy of it, I write my analytics, I can see record level data, and I can really manipulate it in whichever way I like and derive what I derive from it. And that's kind of entirely within my power. So that's level 0, that's no federation. Level 1 changes things somewhat. So level 1, we're back in the situation of I'm requesting access to your data. But instead of receiving a full copy of that data, what I get is permission to query one or more databases where that data is stored. So I can, from my secure workspace, once I have the permission, I can go to the data stores and say, like hypothetically, I'm interested in male subjects between the ages of 15 and 20. And I can query that database for records that match those criteria, and then pull those specific records back into my workspace. So it does change the way that the user accesses the data. It perhaps arguably adds a little bit more privacy because the user only sees data that they're specifically interested in, but ultimately they still end up with access to record level data that they can perform analysis on directly within their workspace. Now, we're not doing that for FEMS. That's not the type of federation that we're talking about for FEMS. For FEMS, when we talk about federation, we're talking about level 2 on this model. So level 2 does, I think, inarguably, like substantially change the researcher, the analyst. It substantially changes their relationship to the data. So when I request access here, once that access is granted, I am not being given access to record level data. What I have permission to do is to package up my analysis, so write my analytical code, send that analysis to the data, have the code be run against the data, and then I get to receive the aggregate result back without ever actually seeing any of the underlying data. Now, obviously, there are a bunch of things that have to go around that to make that possible. And Bruno is now going to kind of walk you through, when we talk about level 2 analysis, what does the network look like? So I shall hand over to Bruno and he can take you through the next section.
Right. I think you can hear me now, but I'll continue. Yeah, just to take over from what Ross was talking about in terms of level 0. So if we look at traditional data access, from the perspective of, let's say, a data provider or hospital, typically what would happen here when you're interacting with a researcher or somebody requesting data is that, well, they would go through your data access or data transfer agreement. And once all the permissions and agreements are signed, then, well, you transfer the data to the researcher, to, let's say, a central node or a central repository. Here, I just call it node for the sake of simplicity, but for example, virtual machine, computer, no matter what. And then this data is harmonized. That's typically what you would like to do if you have multiple data sets. And then from here, the researcher can run their analysis queries, they can run different types of models and eventually get the results. But of course, this is obviously very time consuming. And also, as Ross just mentioned, this is in terms of privacy, it's not really compliant with GDPR or with HIPAA. So if we look now at this picture in terms of federated data access, more towards level 2 that Ross was talking about. So I know this slide is quite busy, but I'll try to zoom in here a little bit. Then if we keep again the same 2 data providers, the additional thing here would be a central node. And here, from the perspective of the data provider, what then you would need to implement, let's say within your own organization, are different things like, well, the data needs to be harmonized. You could also implement some metadata catalogs that allows the users to browse through your metadata. And also other things that Ross will talk about, like a common API or an application programming interface that allows analysis queries to be orchestrated and then run on your local data. From the perspective of a central node, this is where the user would interact with. So after getting the accesses and the permissions granted, then the user could send different types of analysis queries or models that are orchestrated here within the central node and then distributed to be run against the data of each data provider locally. So if we think of a simple example of a machine learning prediction task, then a user would send in a repository or in a container repository the code or the model. This is orchestrated in the central node, distributed to the different local nodes, trained, and then only aggregate results or, for example, model parameters are sent back to the user. Okay. Again, here an overview of the whole picture. But as I mentioned, well, this is not possible without adopting some common standards. And the 2 things here that we're talking about in FEMS is a common data model, OMOP, CDM, and also Ross is going to talk in a little bit about the federated node. But the idea is basically that you standardize the patient level data in the source system to a common data model. I'm not going to go into detail here because this is something that we will talk about in the future meetups, but also it's something that's been quite extensively explained by the Odyssey community. So I really recommend to go through this educational portal in case you want to know more. But basically the idea is that you have several steps to go from raw data to OMOP mapped data. And I pass again the word back to you, Ross. And I'll mute myself a second.
Yep, thanks, Bruno. Yes, so in addition to OMOP, the other common standard that we're adopting as part of the FEMS network is the federated node. So unlike OMOP, which is an existing external standard that we're going to make use of, the federated node is being developed for the FEMS project, but will be available to use by anybody else as an open source component. So what is the federated node? So to give you just a little bit of history, Aridhia was involved in a project in 2020, 2021 called ICODA, the International COVID Data Alliance. And one of the outputs of that project was something called the Common API. So the Common API, you can actually, when the slides are shared, you'll be able to follow that link. The Common API is still there on GitHub. It's an open source project. It is, however, it's not a product itself, it's a specification. So what the Common API does is detail the design of an API that could be used for forming a federated data sharing network. So it details the endpoints, it details the API calls that you would have to make between those endpoints. So the federated node takes that specification and turns it into a deployable piece of software. So, excuse me. So if you could cast your mind back, 5 minutes to one of the first slides, what the federated node really is that cog, that widget that lets you run the remote task within the data controller's network. It's responsible for pulling in the code that Bruno spoke about when he was describing the network, and then sending the results of that analysis back out to the user. Yeah, so to situate it properly within the network, it's what's inside that red box. So it gets deployed to the data controller's environment. It has visibility of the available data sets, and it knows it has a relationship with the central node, and it can pull the analytical code from there and then return any results like to the user for their further analysis. If you could go to the next slide, please, Bruno. Thank you. I won't linger too long on this slide. It's just to give you a kind of impression of the tech stack of the federated node. Suffice to say, it's based on a bunch of existing open source projects. We use Keycloak, we use Nginx, and all of the technologies that we use to deploy it are very commonly available. So Kubernetes, Docker, container registries, things like that. I would say if you have more interest in this, please go to our blog, which provides a lot more detail around the sort of the building of the federated node and how it can be deployed and such. If you could go to the next slide, please, Bruno. And this is our GitHub project. So the federated node will be open source in the next few weeks. It's currently being pen tested. So we want to make sure that we don't have any major security issues, or any security issues at all for that matter. So it's currently being pen tested. The initial readout from that is that there are no substantial problems, but we want to see the full report. Assuming that we're happy with that, we will make it open source in the next sort of 2 to 3 weeks, I would expect. And it can be reached via that link. If you have any questions whatsoever about it in the meantime, please feel free to get in touch. We are more than happy to speak to people about it, demo it, talk about how we expect it to be used in FEMS and what our future plans are. So yeah, please do reach out if you have any interest in it. I think that's kind of that for the federated node. Bruno, if you want to go to the use cases.
Yes, just continuing now for a more real cases, how we're going to test this within FEMS. We talked about this in the previous meetup as well, and this is something that we are going to also discuss in the future meetup, I think in November or December. But the idea is that we test the federated data access procedures or the federated this federated infrastructure using 3 different use cases. The first one is on cardiology operations benchmarking. This is, let's say, the most straightforward one, because it's the federated solution here is more on just federated analytics, where different hospital partners agree on benchmarking statistics, and then these statistics are ran against the data sets of each data controller, and then aggregate results are sent back to the central node in the form of dashboards. And this is important because the idea is to create a benchmarking standard for pediatric cardiology operations. So if you can imagine that in one hospital you have a certain cardiac procedure, and then your patients are discharged within 2 or 3 days, but then in another hospital the patients, the same type of patients with the same procedure, are discharged after only 1 day, then we can definitely learn a lot from each other. And this is what's going to be done through this use case. And the other 2 use cases are similar in technical terms, because they're both machine learning prediction tasks. And the use case 2 is predicting sepsis in the pediatric intensive care unit. And use case 3 is a rare disease called hemophilia. And in both cases, the idea is to develop or train or scale up machine learning models that already have been developed, and train these using the federated infrastructure on the different data sets. And in both cases, in both scenarios, both the federated analytics part and also the federated learning part, I have to reiterate that the data is never leaving the data provider's infrastructure. That's mostly what we had to say about federated data access and how it can be useful for clinical research. But we will have also future meetups. I think Jennifer will also touch on this in a second. But our next one will be in November, and here we will discuss a little bit more on the technical parts of the design of the pediatric health data space. And then in December, we'll touch in more detail about the clinical use cases, and this will be done by other colleagues within FEMS. But for now, I will stop sharing, and I think, Jennifer, you can open the floor for questions.